The text came in at 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. Not at the airport, not at the gate. I was standing in the parking garage at O'Hare, rolling my carry-on toward the elevator when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Flight delayed. Don't wait up. Love you. I stood there for a moment. Read it again. Then I did something I almost never do. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove home. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer. I've looked at bridge load calculations in the middle of the night and caught errors that would have cost lives. I am not a man who panics. I'm not a man who jumps to conclusions. But something about that text, the timing of it, the casualness of it, sat wrong with me the way a crack in a foundation sits wrong. You can't always explain why. You just know something doesn't line up. My name is not important. What matters is that I was supposed to be in Dallas for 3 days for a project review. The meeting got pushed because the structural consultant had an emergency. My wife didn't know yet. I hadn't called her. I was going to surprise her. Maybe pick up dinner on the way home, open a bottle of wine, make something of an ordinary Tuesday. Instead, I sat in my car in the garage for 4 minutes staring at the text. Then I drove home to Chicago. We'd been married 26 years. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she was, and because I'm still not entirely sure what name fits her anymore, was 49. She worked in corporate development for a commercial real estate firm downtown. Vice President of Acquisitions. She'd worked her way up over 12 years, and I was proud of her. I told people that. I meant it. We had 2 kids. Our son Everett was 22 and finishing his last year at Purdue. Our daughter May was 19 and a sophomore at Indiana University. The house in Lincoln Park was ours outright. We had retirement accounts. We had a plan. I pulled into the driveway at 1:47 p.m. Our car was there. I sat with that for a second. She told me she was at work. That was the unspoken part of the text. She was working late. Don't wait up. The flight that she thought I was on would get me home after midnight anyway. She had no reason to believe I was anywhere near Lincoln Park at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I used my key. I didn't honk. I didn't call out. I'm not sure why. I think part of me already knew, and part of me needed 5 more minutes of not knowing. I went in through the side door into the kitchen. I could hear voices upstairs. I sat down at the kitchen table. I am a structural engineer. My whole career has been about what holds and what breaks, what you can build on and what will eventually give. I sat at that kitchen table and I listened to the voices upstairs and I thought, this is the moment. Everything either holds or it doesn't. And I knew. The way you know when a structure is compromised that it wasn't going to hold. I didn't go upstairs. I went back out to my car, drove to a coffee shop on Armitage, ordered a black coffee I didn't drink, and sat in a corner booth for 2 hours. At 4:15, a woman came in and sat at the table next to me. She ordered a green tea and a scone. She was probably mid-50s, trim, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who has been through something and come out the other side of it with her posture intact. She glanced at me twice. On the third time, she said quietly, "You look like a man who just found out something he can't unfind." I looked at her. She said, "I know that look because my ex-husband had it 11 years ago. I don't know why I talked to her. I'm not a man who talks to strangers." But I told her the broad version, the text, coming home early, her car in the driveway, the voices. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Don't go back in the house today. Get out somewhere you can stay tonight." I said I had a brother in Evanston. She said, "Go there. And tomorrow morning, before you do anything else, before you call your wife, before you call your kids, call an attorney, a family law attorney, then ink what you know, and then listen to what they tell you." I asked her why she was telling me this. She said, "Because nobody told me, and I lost 18 months because of it." She put a card on the table. Her name was on it. Joanna, no last name, just a phone number. She said if I needed someone to talk to who'd been through it, I could call. Then she picked up her tea and her scone and moved to the window seat. And that was the last thing she said to me that day. I went to my brother's house in Evanston. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He didn't push. My brother is like me. We learned from the same father that you don't ask a man questions when his jaw is set like that. That night, I lay in his guest room and I went through everything in my head the way I used to audit a project file. Start at the beginning. What are the facts? What are the anomalies? The facts. She had told me she was working late. Her car was in our driveway at 1:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. There were two voices upstairs. I had not gone up. The anomalies over the past 8 or 9 months. She had worked late at least 3 times a week. That was new. Before that, she was home by 6:30 most nights. She'd started going to the gym on Saturday mornings. She'd been quieter at dinner. Not cold, just quieter, less present. I had attributed all of it to a demanding stretch at work. She had talked about a major portfolio acquisition the firm was pursuing. I had listened, nodded, believed her. I thought about the Saturday mornings. I thought about a dinner in July where she'd laughed at something on her phone and turned the screen away before I could see it. I thought about a weekend in August when she said she had to fly to Phoenix for a site visit and came back with no tan and no stories. I fell asleep at some point. I don't know when. The next morning, I called the number Joanna had left me. She answered on the second ring, and she gave me the name of a family law attorney she said was the best in Cook County. She said, "He's not cheap, but he's worth every dollar. Call him before you call your wife. Promise me." I promised. I called the attorney at 9. His name was Philip Hartwell. His assistant got me in for a consultation at 11. I drove downtown and I sat across from a man who had probably heard every version of what I was about to say, and I told him all of it. The text, the car, the voices, the 8 months of late nights and Saturday mornings and turned phone screens. He asked me a series of questions. Do we have a prenuptial agreement? No. Were both our names on all the assets? Yes, mostly. Did I know who she was seeing? No, not yet. Did I have any documentation? Emails, texts, photos? No, nothing. He leaned back and he said, "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home tonight, act normally, and you are not going to confront her yet. I know that's the hardest thing I'm going to say to you today, but if you confront her now, you lose the advantage. You give her time to move money, to get her own attorney, to shape the narrative. Right now, you know something she doesn't know. You know that is an asset. Don't spend it yet." Then he referred me to an investigator, a licensed private investigator out of a firm in Schaumburg, a woman named Patricia. Actually, I won't use her name. I called her that afternoon. She met me at a Panera near the expressway. She was efficient and matter of fact in the way that people are when their job is to find facts that other people have hidden. She said she would need 3 to 4 weeks. She said she would need access to nothing illegal, just time and patience and some footwork. She said the rate was $150 an hour plus expenses, and I should expect the total to run between $4,000 and $7,000. I said fine. I went home that evening. My wife was in the kitchen making pasta. She asked how Dallas was. I told her it was what it was, meetings, the usual. She kissed me on the cheek and poured me a glass of wine and asked about the project timeline. I answered her questions. I ate the pasta. I watched the news. I went to bed. I did that for 3 weeks. I want to tell you what 3 weeks of that does to a man. You learn things about yourself. You learn that you are more capable of stillness than you believed. You learn that stillness is not the same as peace. I was not at peace. I was doing what I trained myself to do on every project that mattered. Hold the structure together until you have all the data you need. Don't make a move on incomplete information. The consequences of moving too early are worse than the consequences of waiting. I talked to Philip twice during those 3 weeks. He was preparing. He had a forensic accountant he worked with, a man named, again, I'll leave the name out, who began quietly reviewing the financial records I had access to, joint accounts primarily. He found something in the third week, over the preceding 14 months. A total of $31,400 had been transferred in increments from our joint savings to an account my wife had opened in her name, only at a different bank. The transfers were small enough, ranging from 800 to 2020, that they'd never triggered any alert. She'd been methodical about it. She had not been sloppy. When Philip told me that, something shifted in me. Not the anger I expected, something quieter, something that felt like grief. but colder. Because hiding $31,000 over 14 months doesn't happen on impulse. That's a plan. That's someone who has been, for over a year, preparing for a life that doesn't include you. The investigator called me on a Thursday afternoon in October. She said she had what I needed and asked me to come to her office. I sat across from her and she laid out a folder. Photographs, time-stamped, surveillance notes, a summary document she prepared. The man's name was Garrett Winslow. He was 56. He was the managing director of acquisitions at a private equity firm that had done several deals with my wife's company. They'd met, as best as the investigator could determine, about 16 months ago. He was married. His wife's name was Sylvia, and they had a house in Hinsdale. He was, by any external measure, a successful man. His LinkedIn listed an MBA from Northwestern, 20 years in commercial real estate finance. The investigator had documented 11 separate meetings between my wife and Garrett Winslow over the preceding 23 days. 7 of them were at a hotel near the Merchandise Mart. 2 were at a restaurant in River North that I had taken my wife to for our 25th anniversary. 2 were at our house on weekdays, between noon and 4 in the afternoon. I looked at that last line for a long time. Our house. While I was at work, I thanked the investigator. I paid the invoice, $6,340. I drove to Philip's office and I sat down and I said, "What do we do now?" What we did was this. Philip had been building the case in parallel. He had the financial records, the hidden account, the transfers. He had documentation of the marital asset situation. He was now going to file for divorce on grounds of adultery. In Illinois, adultery itself doesn't dramatically alter the property division, but it is relevant and it matters for the narrative, and it matters for my peace of mind to have it in the record. More importantly, Philip said there was another conversation to be had. He said Garrett Winslow's firm had a code of conduct policy, and it was possible, depending on how their arrangement was structured, that what had occurred between him and my wife could constitute a policy violation. He advised me to write a letter. A factual, documented, non-threatening letter addressed to the CEO of Winslow's firm, outlining what I knew and what documentation I had. I asked him if that was legal. He said yes, done correctly, it is entirely legal to report factual information to a person's employer. I asked him what I wanted to accomplish with it. He said that wasn't for him to answer. He said some men want accountability, some want leverage, some just want someone else to know the truth. I thought about it for 24 hours. Then I wrote the letter. Factual. No embellishment. I listed dates, locations, documented meetings. I noted the conflict of interest implications given the business relationship between his firm and my wife's firm. I sent it certified mail. I also separately sent a brief and courteous email to the managing partner at my wife's firm. I did not accuse. I did not demand. I simply noted that I had documentation indicating that an undisclosed personal relationship existed between a VP at their firm and a senior director at a partner company they had done business with, and that I believed their compliance team would want to be aware of it. Philip had told me to do nothing emotional and nothing impulsive. I did not. Both communications were measured. Both were factual. I signed my name to both of them. On a Friday morning in early November, Philip served my wife with divorce papers. I was not home when it happened. I was at my brother's house in Evanston, where I quietly moved the majority of my personal belongings over the preceding 2 weeks. I had removed nothing from the marital home that wasn't mine individually. I had taken my tools, my books, my father's watch, the photographs from my study, and my files. She called me 20 minutes after the process server left. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once, then forwarded it to Philip. I did not call her back that day. The following Monday, I received a call that I had not expected, though I should have. It was from a woman who identified herself as Sylvia Winslow. She said, "My husband told me what happened. The letter to his firm. I want you to know. I already knew. I've known for 7 months. And I want you to know that my attorney and your attorney should probably talk." Her attorney and Philip talked. Sylvia Winslow was pursuing her own divorce from Garrett. She had documentation of her own financial irregularities she'd found, separate accounts, a pattern she described to her attorney as funding a parallel life. Her attorney believed there may be a civil claim possible against my wife's firm for the business conflict of interest. She wasn't my ally in any legal sense, but we were, in a quiet and sad way, people who had arrived at the same wreckage from different directions. The divorce took 11 months. I want to be honest with you about what those 11 months were. They were not a movie. There was no moment of triumphant confrontation in a courtroom. There was no scene where she broke down and admitted everything while dramatic music played. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and phone calls with Philip and nights at my brother's house, eating cereal at 10 p.m. because I didn't feel like cooking. There was one meeting, a mediation session in February, where I sat across the table from my wife for the first time since I'd served her. She looked different to me. I don't mean she looked worse or older or diminished. I mean she looked like a stranger. 26 years, and I sat across the table from her and I thought, I don't know who this is. And I'm not sure I ever did entirely. She had an attorney who tried in the early stages to characterize the hidden account as money she was saving for a shared goal we discussed, renovating the kitchen. Philip dismantled that argument with the forensic accountant's documentation in about 15 minutes. The account had been opened 6 weeks after she met Garrett Winslow. The timing was not ambiguous. She did not contest the adultery grounds. In the final settlement, I retained the Lincoln Park house, which I later sold, because I did not want to live there anymore and used the proceeds to buy a smaller place in Evanston near my brother. I received a fair division of the retirement accounts. The hidden $31,400 was characterized as marital asset dissipation and factored into the settlement in my favor. Garrett Winslow's firm concluded, following their own internal review, that his relationship with the vendor's VP constituted a conflict of interest violation. He was removed from his position in December. I don't know what happened to him after that. I didn't need to know. My wife's firm placed her on administrative leave pending their compliance review. She resigned before the review concluded. She did not get a severance package. She negotiated one briefly, and then her firm's attorneys reviewed the conflict of interest documentation and the negotiation stopped. I heard through Philip months later that she had found work at a smaller firm in the suburbs. I don't know more than that, and I don't need to. Everett found out from me in a phone call in December, the month after I served her. I told him the truth, in the broad strokes, the way you tell a 22-year-old son the truth. Enough to explain what happened, not enough to destroy his image of his mother entirely. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said I was getting there. He drove home from Purdue the next weekend, and we watched the Bears lose on a Sunday afternoon and didn't talk about any of it again for a while. Sometimes that's what you need. May took it harder. She's always been closer to her mother, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how some daughters are. She called me crying. She asked me questions I couldn't fully answer. She asked me if I was sure. I told her I was sure, and that the most important thing she needed to know was that her mother and I both loved her, and that wasn't going to change regardless of what the two of us had done to each other as a married couple. She cried some more. I held the phone and listened and let her. She's going to be fine. They both will. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they are more perceptive than we think. Everett told me later that he'd noticed his mother seeming distant since the previous spring. He hadn't said anything because he didn't know what to say. I told him he didn't have to have the words. Neither did I, most of the time. Joanna, the woman from the coffee shop, the one who stopped me that afternoon in September, I called her once in January when I was in the middle of the worst of the paperwork and the waiting. We talked for maybe 30 minutes. She told me about her own divorce, the years after it, the way she'd rebuilt. She said something I've thought about many times since. She said the goal isn't to feel nothing. The goal is to build something worth feeling again. I'm 63. I'm not rebuilding in the dramatic sense. I'm not starting over with grand ambitions. I sold the Lincoln Park house in the spring. I bought a 2-bedroom in Evanston, 6 blocks from my brother and his wife. I have a small home office where I do consulting work. I'm semi-retired, but I still review structural designs a few days a week, and I find it satisfying in the way that I always did. I walk along the lake in the mornings. I cook for myself, which I'm better at than I expected. There are things I'm still working through. I'd be dishonest if I said otherwise. 26 years doesn't dissolve cleanly. You don't excise a quarter of a century from your life and feel nothing at the seams. There are moments, a song, a restaurant, a habit of reaching for my phone at a particular time of day that catch me off guard. But here's what I know, and I want to say this carefully because I think it matters. I sat at that kitchen table in September and I heard voices upstairs, and I could have gone up. I could have done what part of me wanted to do, which was to walk up those stairs and throw open that door and let the worst of myself out. I didn't. I got back in my car and I drove to a coffee shop. And a stranger told me something true, and I listened to her. I called an attorney before I called my wife. I moved with information instead of emotion. I don't say that to sound cold. I say it because I think about what would have happened if I'd gone upstairs. Best case, I cause a scene and she gets in front of the story first. Worst case, it's ugly in ways that damage the kids and damage me legally, and give her advantages I would have handed her by acting on feeling instead of fact. The structure held because I maintained it. That's the only way I know how to say it. My son called me last month. He's been offered a job in Chicago after graduation, good firm, good offer. He asked if he could stay with me for a few weeks while he looks for an apartment. I told him I had a guest room and he was welcome as long as he needed. He laughed. He said, "Dad, you sound good." I said I was getting there, and I meant it more than I had in January. The Evanston place has a small back porch. I drink my coffee out there in the mornings when the weather allows. From there, I can see the roof of my brother's house 2 streets over. His wife waves sometimes when she's in their yard. I wave back. It's quiet. It's mine. I'm 63 years old and I'm starting the next part. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but the foundation is solid, and that's where everything begins. I've been asked a few times by my brother, by Everett once, by a neighbor who knew a little of what happened, whether I regret the way I handled it, whether I wish I'd done something differently, whether there's a part of me that needed to confront her face to face, to have that moment in the house, to say out loud what I knew. Honestly, no. And I've thought about it enough to know that's not me suppressing something. That's just the truth. Here's what I've come to understand about the whole thing. Not about her, not about Garrett Winslow, not about the marriage, but about what I did and why it worked. Every action I took in those months had a consequence. Every action she took had one too. That's not philosophy. That's just how things work when you pay attention. She made choices over 14 months, small ones mostly. A transfer here, a meeting there, a text that said I'm stuck at work when her car was in our driveway. None of those choices were dramatic on their own, but they accumulated. They built something, a hidden structure running parallel to the visible one. And when it came down completely. Not because I was clever, because weight eventually finds the weakest point. It always does. I made choices too. I chose to walk back out of the house instead of going upstairs. I chose to listen to a stranger in a coffee shop instead of dismissing her. I chose to call Philip before I called my wife. I chose to move with information instead of emotion, which is the hardest thing I have ever done in my personal life, and also, I think, the most important. Joanna told me something that afternoon that I keep coming back to. She said nobody told her. She lost 18 months because of it. What she meant was that nobody handed her the map when she needed it. Nobody said, "Here is what to do before you do the thing you want to do." She had to find it herself late, at a cost. And she chose to pass that on to a stranger sitting in a corner booth who looked like he was about to make the same mistake. That's not a small thing. That's a person who turned her own hard experience into something that helps someone else. I think about the kind of character that requires, the kind of intelligence, not book intelligence, but the intelligence of having paid attention to your own life and extracted something useful from the worst of it. I want to say something to anyone watching this who is somewhere in the middle of what I went through. The part before you know everything. The part where your stomach is doing one thing and your mind is trying to do another. The part where you could go upstairs or you could get back in your car. Get back in your car. Not because you don't have the right to your anger. You do. Not because the truth doesn't matter. It does, and you'll have it. But because how you move in the first 72 hours shapes everything that comes after. The choices you make when you are most hurt are the ones that follow you longest. I am 63 years old. I've built structures that are still standing. I know that a foundation laid in a moment of rage is not a foundation at all. And I know that a man who holds himself together when everything in him wants to break, that man walks out of the other side of it with something intact that cannot be taken back from him. That's what I walked out with. Not the house, not the settlement, myself. That's the only thing that was ever really mine to protect.